Hi, Brian Lehrer here. Up next, Brian Lehrer Weekend. 3 of our favorite segments from the week packaged together for you to listen to on the weekend. So enjoy, and I'll see you back on the radio Monday at 10 a.m. on WNYC and WNYC.org. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. On today's show, what happens with housing development? What actually happens now that the city's ballot measures on that got approved? Also, the Supreme Court hears the Trump tariffs case. We'll hear a little bit of audio on how the justices question the two sides and why this case is being watched so closely for its impact not only on prices, but on American democracy. But we start with more about the election of Zohran Mamdani as mayor. With us now is political analyst and sometimes organizer Michael Lange, who writes the fascinating New York politics newsletter called The Narrative Wars. How closely does he inspect New York politics? Well, on the day before the election, he posted an article called Predicting Every Block of the 2025 New York City mayoral election. Maybe we'll see how much he got right. Also before the election, he wrote a piece called How Zohran Can Reach 50%, which Mamdani did, and one called The End of Andrew Cuomo, cheekily subtitled The Politics of Pronunciation, and most of you know what that refers to. So Michael Lange's been on it. By way of background, he also formerly worked in the district office of Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez and on the successful campaign of one of the exonerated Central Park Five, Yusuf Salaam, for the New York City Council. Michael, thanks for coming on at this historic moment. Welcome back to WNYC.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Brian.
So how does one even try to predict every block? That's more than 120,000 New York City blocks by your count in an election of 2 million votes.
Well, it takes one very large Google spreadsheet and a lot of past data, and also just, I would say, a lifetime living in New York City and walking all the blocks of many of the boroughs. So, it's an art form for sure. I certainly did not get everything correct. There's always room for improvement, but it was a very fun exercise to do, and I'm glad it resonated with a lot of
right. And of
New
course,
Yorkers.
The fun is in what we can all learn from what you got right, what you got wrong, even what questions you chose to ask. So when I clicked on your interactive map in your prediction article, it seemed to show not quite block by block, but election district by election district, which is still a Herculean feat because there are more than 4,000 of those. So have you now gone through all of those to see what you got right and what you got wrong and how much we can learn from that about who this city is politically right now?
Yes, I have. So I guess to start with what I got wrong, I figured that Curtis Sliwa would see some diminished support for Andrew Cuomo, kind of tarring him as a spoiler. I thought he would finish at around 11%, which, again, was lower than all of the polling averages. I think his betting market odds of finishing under 10% were only 25%. Sliwa's support across the city collapsed. He finished with only 7% of the vote. He did not win a single election district. In parts of Staten Island where Trump received over 85% of the vote, Sliwa only won around 25%, with Andrew Cuomo winning close to 2/3 of the vote. So I think, again, I accounted for some late movement. This was also came out before Donald Trump quasi-endorsed Andrew Cuomo, but I think there was a huge element of tactical voting that helped Andrew Cuomo ultimately get to over 41%. I am happy to say, though, that kind of for my predictions of the Mamdani coalition, they were much more close, borough by borough, and then just the top line. I was never off by more than 2 points. And I think, given I've closely covered the Mamdani campaign since before he even announced, I am proud of that. And I think it was a really interesting, just wider kind of coalition between what Mamdani built and kind of, I wouldn't really say the Cuomo coalition, because it really at the end, I would say, became an anti-Mamdani coalition. There was many, the map of the city, I would say it was reminiscent of the 2009 mayoral election between Michael Bloomberg and Bill Thompson. And I also think it had echoes of 1989 and 1993. Those were the two elections where David Dinkins faced Rudy Giuliani, and that you have like one coalition which is very democratic and it's built around kind of the working and the middle class. It's very multiracial. It's very indexed towards labor. It does well in parts of Manhattan, but not all parts. And it particularly performs well in the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn. And I think Mamdani's coalition, especially in this general election, was kind of that next step, or that new era of the David Dinkins Rainbow Coalition. Whereas Cuomo's opposition force to Mamdani, it was very wealthy Manhattanites, it was middle-class Jewish neighborhoods, it was Orthodox and Hasidic enclaves, and it was the dwindling but still powerful kind of white ethnic New York. And you also mix in some Chinese American immigrants and things like that. That was almost the new era of the Giuliani coalition. But in the last 10, 20, 30 years, that coalition was once a majority. It is now kind of shrunk to the point where, again, Cuomo only got 41%. So those are kind of my big picture thoughts.
And I want to drill down on
For sure.
some of the more granular looks that you took, really interestingly, or the way you posed some of the questions just before the election to dive down deeper on some of those coalitions. And you had posted 4 central questions. One, will Mamdani crack 50%? We know now that he did, just barely, but still that means he got more votes than Cuomo and Sliwa combined. Then you asked, can the first major Muslim candidate for mayor win back the city's working class Hispanic and Asian communities that swung dramatically toward Donald Trump last November? How many Republican voters can Andrew Cuomo peel away from GOP nominee Curtis Sliwa? I think we just covered that one. And will the black electorate, older and historically loyal to Cuomo, shift to Mamdani, the Democratic nominee? So let's take those 2 big ones that we haven't touched yet, one by one. The first one is fascinating. Can the first major Muslim candidate for mayor win back the city's working class Hispanic and Asian communities that swung dramatically toward Donald Trump last November? How much did Mamdani do that, and where?
I think for the most part, he did. I would say that there was a real contingent, especially in such a high turnout election, of Mamdani Trump voters or Trump Mamdani voters. But I think those folks, it was, Puerto Rican neighborhoods, South American neighborhoods in Queens, Muslims and South Asians. I think Zohran Mamdani performed quite well in a lot of the immigrant neighborhoods that shifted dramatically towards Trump. Corona, Queens in particular was a place I was watching very closely. There is no neighborhood in the entire country that has experienced such a shift right over the last decade. Mamdani did well there. He won all of but 2 precincts, I believe. But, so again, Muslims, Hispanic voters for the most part, and then South Asian voters. He really, I think, succeeded in that, and turnout there was relatively strong. I think where, and this is something that, we've kind of seen over the last couple elections in New York City, where there might be a more permanent realignment towards more moderate or quote unquote conservative ideological politics is kind of in a lot of some of the city's Chinese neighborhoods, particularly. And I think some of this also has to do with class character as well. Mamdani did very well in like Elmhurst, for instance. And Elmhurst is I would describe it as very working class Chinese neighborhood in kind of the middle of Queens. He played Cuomo to a draw, I would say, in Flushing, which again is, I would say, described as a relatively lower income neighborhood. But in the more middle class Chinese neighborhoods, Cuomo did dramatically better than he did in the primary. And I think that was a consequence of a lot of independents, Republicans, moderate Democrats who had maybe sat that election out, moving towards him. To give you an example, like Murray Hill in Queens, Cuomo did quite well. Bensonhurst and Bath Beach in southern Brooklyn, Mamdani won both of those neighborhoods very convincingly in the primary, but in the general, they switched back to Cuomo. But I think above board, Zohran did really well in those immigrant neighborhoods, except I would say probably some of the more middle class Chinese neighborhoods, which are, I would say, a symptom of a broader political realignment that's been happening in those communities for the last couple of years.
Really interesting to hear that there were any New York neighborhoods that shifted from Mamdani to Cuomo from the primary to the general, given the overall result this week. But can you hazard a guesstimate, back to the original question about Mamdani Trump voters, of how many New Yorkers, like how many humans, voted for Donald Trump in 2024 and Zohran Mamdani in 2025 who live in New York City?
Oh boy. I should drill down on this more, but I would say it's somewhere in the tens of thousands. There will be around 2.25 million people, I would estimate, that are going to vote in this election. But when all the ballots are counted and things of that sort, and there were 2.8 million people who voted in the presidential election. I should also give a shout out to the CUNY Graduate Center. They have an excellent interactive map, and you can do multiple filters of voter performance and things like that. And one of the things you can do is you can overlay where Trump did well with how the candidates themselves perform this time. So I think it's a very conservative estimate to say that Mamdani won tens of thousands of voters who voted for Donald Trump. It might even be in the, in the low, I could see that number cracking 100,000. But of those numbers, it is very indexed to working class, Hispanic, South Asian, and Muslim voters. There was not quite a white working class Mamdani Trump voter. We didn't. I mean, I'm sure there were, of course, a couple on Staten Island and things like that, but it was not like an overwhelming development. Mamdani's strength was for bringing a lot of these immigrant neighborhoods back into the Democratic Party tent.
There are definitely some listeners now who are going, no, I don't believe this. Those people don't actually exist. No person could have voted for Donald Trump and then voted for Zohran Mamdani, given how politically opposite they are in so many ways. So how do you explain those voters? What were they thinking last year versus what were they thinking this year?
I think this is where Mamdani's, the cost of living, economic-based message, I think really resonated. I also think that there were many, I would maybe describe them as like lower propensity voters who were more disillusioned with politics, who last year, were kind of upset at Democratic neglect on a handful of issues and cast their ballot for Trump as like a hand grenade in the voting booth per se. I think that seeing some of the chaos that Trump has brought about in the last 11 months has maybe pushed them away from, the Republican Party and things of that sort. And I also think that Mamdani really ran a campaign that was very present in these neighborhoods. It was present all across the city, and he personally was present, learning languages, visiting mosques, speaking to voters everywhere. Like he nailed the ethos of like New Yorkers who show up everywhere. And I think some of this is also just an endorsement of vibes, like listening, caring, that type of stuff. And I think Zohran really communicated that. And that's another reason why over 1 million people showed up to vote for him. But it's not a neat ideological issue.
Mm-hmm. So listeners, we can take calls and texts on a few tracks here with political analyst Michael Lange, who, if you're just joining us, literally takes a block-by-block approach to analyzing the New York City election results. One, you can just ask him a question about your own block or neighborhood or any trend around the city, 212-433-WNYC. Two, let's see if we have people from some of the demographics he was super focused on in the election. In the questions he posed, in his words, like the one we were just talking about, can the first major Muslim candidate for mayor win back the city's working class Hispanic and Asian communities that swung dramatically toward Donald Trump last November? So if you listening right now are a Hispanic or Asian American New Yorker who voted for Donald Trump last year and Zohran Mamdani this year, please call in. I think this is still a relative needle in a haystack ask, but if you are that person or one of those people, let us hear from you. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. And another Michael Lange question that we will get to that he was asking going into this week, will the black electorate, older and historically loyal to Cuomo, as he put it, shift to Mamdani, the Democratic nominee? So listeners like that, older black listeners who maybe voted Cuomo in the primary and then flipped to Mamdani for the general, what drove that switch for you? 212-433-9692. How about voters new to New York the last 10 years? That was a big Mamdani demographic in the primary. From what I had read and heard, if you came to this city from anywhere in the last 10 years, whether from Albany or Albania, whether from Kansas or Kandahar, whether from Minnesota or Mozambique, whether from Boston or Bangladesh, why'd you come and how'd you vote? 212-433-WNYC, call or text for anyone who identifies with any of those questions or who just wants to ask Michael Lange a question of your own. 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692. And Michael, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you that our lines are jumping right away. We'll get to some callers as we go. So that other question that you asked, will the black electorate, older and historically loyal to Cuomo, shift to Mamdani? So how much did that, in fact, happen?
It happened, I would say dramatically. There were neighborhoods that Cuomo outpaced Mamdani in the primary by 20, 30, even 40 points that universally flipped to Mamdani, 10, 20-point wins. It's not Cuomo's support, I guess you could say, maybe collapse is too strong because in some of these places he still did get 30, 35, 40% of the vote. But it was a dramatic reversal. According to the aforementioned CUNY Graduate Center resource, the census areas with predominantly black eligible voters were won by Mamdani by 30 points. The New York Times conducted a somewhat similar analysis that had Mamdani winning black majority election districts by 24%. And so again, these areas, and this is also across a class spectrum from like lower income neighborhoods like Brownsville to more working class neighborhoods like Wakefield in the Northeast Bronx to like your more middle class neighborhoods like Canarsie, like Southeast Queens. This was a universal shift. There were a couple places where Cuomo still did hold on to eke out like narrow majorities. Rochdale Village in Southeast Queens was one place where he performed relatively well. Co-op City as well. Some of the senior center precincts he still won. And because, but this was largely a consequence of age, kind of in the places where 65% of the electorate is over 60 years old, like he would do really well, things like that. But Mamdani would not only would he have not gotten 50% were these inroads not made, he might not have won to begin with. And I think that also for as well as he did and all the improvement that he showed over the last couple months, I think throughout his term and, the reelection 4 years from now, I think his ceiling with black New Yorkers is even higher because if you think about kind of the cost of living crisis and pushing people in the city to the brink, the center of that story is black New York. No demographic group has lost a greater percentage or in larger numbers of their population in the last decade and 2 decades, a direct consequence, I would say, of rising costs, particularly around housing. So it's a huge story that shaped the contours of this election. Had Cuomo held on to even close to the amount of black support that he had in the primary, he would have won. But instead, Mamdani is now over 50%, going to win by 9%. It's an incredible story and one that was not, I would say, a foregone conclusion based on the primary results.
Yeah, and in the pre-election polls, Mamdani had mostly hit a ceiling in the 40s, 40-something percent. Does it appear to you that he cracked 50% by late deciders swinging his way?
I don't quite know if it's that because, I guess looking at the map, he didn't win any areas that I was really like stunned that he ended up winning. I think it was more just like the polls once more undercounting his support, albeit less dramatically than the primary. And I think, frankly, if Cuomo did not see Sliwa's collapse and also like a surge of anti-Mamdani support, I think the polls would have been off too. It was kind of, I mean, it was an extremely salient election that dominated attention, I would say, of New Yorkers for the better part of a year, and that's why we had such high turnout. Cuomo is also, I would say, on pace to get the most votes since David Dinkins. It's just that Mamdani is on pace to get the most votes since John Lindsay. So I think both the pro-Mamdani and the anti-Mamdani coalitions were very motivated. It's just one was larger and also growing, while the other was, more declining in numbers. And this was kind of, I would say, maybe the last gasp of the Giuliani-Bloomberg coalition.
Listener asks in a text message about their own neighborhood. Since you do neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block, how did Windsor Terrace vote? Do you have it for that part of Brooklyn?
Yes, I do. Here, I'm just gonna scroll on my little map. Depends on the individual block level, but almost all of the precincts in Windsor Terrace are between 69% Mamdani and like 76%. So pretty dramatic win. I thought there was a chance that he might, in a place like Windsor Terrace, get close to 80%. I believe he did in the Democratic primary. But again, Cuomo being able to also motivate his coalition in a way that, frankly, he was not able to do in the primary, I think helped him kind of get a surge to quote, I say this with air quotes, to keep Mamdani at only 75% in some of those neighborhoods, which still, while you would characterize them in a primary as, commie corridor and no king, still have like a non-insignificant number of like older white ethnic New Yorkers who used to, who have lived there for a long time, like Windsor Terrace, generations ago, home to Italian and Irish New Yorkers. We saw some of this also in like Greenpoint. There were places where Mamdani, again, in quotes, like only got 75%. It's because, there's some older Polish voters, things like that. Also, in the Ditmars section of Astoria, again, air quotes, Mamdani only getting 65% because, more of the Greek homeowners, which are not, at this stage, a part of the Democratic primary electorate, are still a part of the general electorate. So it was a really fascinating map and fascinating exercise.
You just referred in passing to a couple of your labels for what you call the 11 types of New York City neighborhoods. And I want to stop here and read the list for our listeners.
Oh, boy.
Before we take some calls. And then we can talk about a few of these and where and who they are, the way you organize this. So here we go, listeners. You ready for these 11? Michael Lange calls these neighborhoods the Anti-Commie Corridor, Archie Bunker's Descendants, the Capitalist Corridor, Commie Corridor Junior, Commie Corridor Senior, MSNBC viewers, No Kings Marchers, Open Doors, Swing States, Black Belt, and the Forgotten People. And before you get complaints, Michael, I know you mean Commie Corridor as a joke, but let me ask you to pick some of your more progressive neighborhood types apart. For example, two of them that I just read out there are MSNBC viewers and No Kings Marchers. Are they not the same people?
So I guess this is a very interesting point here, and maybe my descriptions are not perfect. I kind of had my idea for the No Kings Marchers were like explicit, like more explicitly progressive, more activist type, more also like I would say middle to older age, whereas like the Commie Corridor, those neighborhoods are very young. The No Kings Marchers are places like Park Slope and Carroll Gardens, overwhelmingly Democratic. I would arguably say that the city's most loyal Democratic constituencies, but their political bent is like more progressive, places where Cuomo was throttled by Mamdani and Brad Lander in the primary. Whereas the MSNBC watchers, it's a little different crew. It's a little more like liberal, technocratic, places where Michael Bloomberg was very popular, your Pete Buttigieg's, your Elizabeth Warren's, more concentrated in Manhattan, and where in the primary support was very split between Mamdani, Cuomo, and Lander. I expected some of those more liberal voters, even if they were maybe a little concerned with Mamdani's theoretical lack thereof of experience. He's only 34. If they didn't have like super strong views around the war in Gaza and the Israeli government and things of that nature, I kind of expected some of those places to more fall in line with the Democratic nominee. And we saw that in some parts of Manhattan, like Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, but we also saw places that kind of fit that description that were ironically more with Mamdani in the primary, but then gave Cuomo greater support in the general. So there's a degree of, there's also like old money versus new money in there, but the No Kings are more progressive. The MSNBC folks are a little more liberal.
Here's a text message that you will like, Michael. It says, "We love you, Michael Lange," written from the commie corridor.
Oh, boy. Okay.
So do you want to just say a little bit more about what you mean by that? Because maybe you coined that phrase tongue-in-cheek before Donald Trump started actually calling the Democratic nominee an actual communist.
I know. I have to ask Zohran if he's mad at me about that. But yeah, so this is, I do a lot of progressive left organizing, and this was kind of just like a joking term that we threw around almost for years. And then I wrote an article in the primary months ago where I kind of used that label for the first time publicly. And it is tongue in cheek, right? As Archie Bunker's Descendants is tongue in cheek as well. And as is the anti-commie corridor, where basically it's about these young, relatively college-educated neighborhoods where a lot of people rent, and that have slowly remade New York City politics since 2016, since 2018. And it's kind of this, again, it's literally a corridor. It's from Astoria, and it kind of stretches very neatly all the way to Sunset Park. It goes through Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Bushwick, Bedford-Stuyvesant, et cetera, et cetera. And these were the places where the Democratic Socialists of America, the New York City chapter, they've won a lot of elections. AOC's district partially is in that. And it's where there was, including Zohran Mamdani, where there was a real bench of already like avowedly left-leaning legislators, council members, things like that. Mamdani in the primary not only did super well in those neighborhoods, but he produced a wider template, and it was like, hey, young people don't just live in these 8 neighborhoods. They live in Hell's Kitchen, the East Village, parts of Upper Manhattan, like Hamilton Heights, Inwood, Harlem. And they also stretch farther into Bedford-Stuyvesant or Flatbush, or some of these other neighborhoods that may be previously assumed by the political class, the political intelligentsia. So, but yes, it is all tongue-in-cheek. These are just left-leaning younger New Yorkers who are very hurt by the costs of living.
So one of the groups who we've invited for this call-in is anybody in what you estimate to be tens of thousands of people, maybe 100,000 people.
Yeah, 100,000 people might be a stretch. I was thinking about that, but tens of thousands.
Okay, tens of thousands of people in New York City who voted for Donald Trump last year and Zohran Mamdani this year. And Ruth on Staten Island might not be one of those people, but she thinks she lives in one of those neighborhoods. Ruth, you're on WNYC. Thank you for calling in.
Thank you for taking my call. Yes, I'm from one of those neighborhoods, but I'm from one of the neighborhoods on Staten Island that actually did go for Mamdani. And I just had a comment, which is I think that Mamdani very successfully presented himself as someone who was an advocate and a champion for people who have felt that they were not being really represented. And I think it's identical to the kind of presentation that Trump has given as somebody who's going to be the champion. You know, he says, if you want to get to somebody, you're going to have to go through me. And Mamdani has said the same thing. And I think that people are so looking for somebody who's going to be a champion for them that Mamdani's appeal was largely in that.
Makes sense to you, Michael?
makes perfect sense. I think that he, I think also people are looking for community, and the Mamdani campaign, I think, really did build a community, not just of volunteers, but just kind of not only around, also not only like around him, not like a cult of personality, but about like the New York City mosaic. So I think they did that, and people are really looking for that in this age, and the door knocking, the events, it's all kind of part of that. But I thought the caller put it very well, that there's just such dissatisfaction with leadership in not just not just with Trump, but also I think in the Democratic Party, and the listener ethos of Zohran. I thought really you can't underrate how much that resonated with people. Like the authenticity is such a buzzword. If people are thinking about how to be authentic, they are not being authentic. He's just kind of himself. And I say this also as someone who I think knew him relatively well for a number of years. This is who he is, and I think they were able to show that to people before this tidal wave of outside spending and things like that. I'm sure if Cuomo could do it over again, they would have started these negative independent expenditures far earlier. And New Yorkers really got to look at like who this guy is, and he also has tremendous energy, I would say, to just kind of keep up the pace of his campaigning, and just it's not even like being everywhere at once. That's part of it, but it's also showing people that you are there all at once. And I think they did a really good job of creating that.
So I heard from one young voter in their 20s who was not in love with Mamdani politically, was considering not voting at all, but ultimately said he voted for Mamdani because he was pulling all-nighters to campaign just before the election while Cuomo took 10 days off right after Labor Day. So somebody actually wrote that to me. All right, we're going to continue in a minute with political analyst Michael Lange, who takes a hyper-granular look at the election results. We have a caller, Maria Elena in Brooklyn. Stay there. We're going to get to you right after the break. Caller who wants to talk about how much Israel-Gaza, or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a larger sense, was a factor in the voting this week. So stay with us. Brian Lehrer with Michael Lange on WNYC. Brian Lehrer on WNYC as we continue with Michael Lange, who writes the fascinating New York politics newsletter called The Narrative Wars. And how closely does he inspect New York politics? Well, on the day before the election, he posted an article called Predicting Every Block of the 2025 New York City mayoral election. And Maria Elena in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hello, Maria Elena.
Good morning. Good morning, Brian. Thank you. I was wondering how come there is no mention of Palestine. In fact, I actually voted for Mamdani because of a New York Times article I read on voting day on his lifelong commitment to Palestine and the defense of it.
It's a good question. Mamdani didn't run on Israel, Gaza, or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict generally. Michael, as you know, he tried to stay laser-focused on affordability, but of course Cuomo ran heavily against him on that. In the end, Mamdani's views on the Middle East, I had read in the spring, might have helped him more than hurt him in the primary, which would be a change from the past in New York politics. But can you tell how much the issue, one way or another, contributed to the heavy turnout, or what percentage of the Cuomo vote it drove?
Yeah, I think it was an intensely motivating issue for his base, but also not just his base. I think the Palestine question is like one of authenticity. And what I mean by that is I can't tell you how many voters I spoke to who in the primary and in the general who referenced the moment in the debate where almost like clockwork, the candidates are asked like, oh, where would you visit as mayor? And then one by one, they're like Israel, the Holy Land, basically like one after the other, with only a few folks saying differently. And Mamdani just said, I'm staying in New York. And then he's like pressed on it. And he's like, no, like I want to be a mayor for all New Yorkers, and then includes Jewish New Yorkers. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And he's like, I will meet them in their synagogues and their temples, but it will be here. That's like what my focus is. And I think that was just such, and that answer went viral. Like even Joe Rogan was talking about it. And I think, you know, there's that, you know, that kind of moment of authenticity, but then you also add that during the course of this campaign, Israel really ramped up some of the bombing and the famine and things like that, and slowly people were politicized and polarized against what was happening in Gaza, and I think that also, I would say, helped his message, because then here's someone who has been so consistent on this issue for not even years, decades. And then I would say more mainstream people came around to his side of the issue, or at least saw where he was coming from. But I think it is, when I say it's an issue of authenticity, it was, you know, AIPAC and the Israel lobby, they have such influence on our politics. And then for so many politicians, as the war was really escalating, as things were getting very dire, to be relatively mealy-mouthed or silent about it, while he was not. It was a moment of like, what do you really believe? You know, do you care about human rights universally? And then it's also being injected into a local race, and you know, he's being painted in all these terrible Islamophobic terms and things like that. And it was just, you know, I think many New Yorkers got a sense that from Cuomo and from others that those folks attacking Mamdani were not actually concerned about the plight of everyday New Yorkers. So certainly a huge part of how he came off as an authentic person to voters, and also a really important issue I think Palestine started as a really important issue to mainly his base, but the escalation of the war really brought the issue into a broader consciousness.
Do you have turnout estimates by demographic groups, including Jews and Muslims, and how close those numbers are now, or white, black, Hispanic, Asian?
I don't quite have those numbers. I just don't have the voter file yet, but kind of from my reading of the map, the election districts, things like that, I do think the anti-Mamdani coalition in certain Jewish neighborhoods, be they very wealthy neighborhoods like the Upper East Side's, you know, older, more capitalist corridor, kind of from Park to Fifth Avenue, some middle-class Jewish neighborhoods like parts of Riverdale, not all, and then Forest Hills, Kew Gardens, and Queens. Cuomo, there was an uptick in turnout, and for the most part, it benefited Cuomo, as well as in your more Hasidic and Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods, also the Sephardic Jewish population in Gravesend. Those places did have very high anti-Mamdani turnout, because there was also more, not all of these Orthodox communities registered as Democrats. So the general election non-closed primary system helped boost that turnout, certainly. And also those populations are larger than the Muslim population, the South Asian population. So I think you did see a surge in the general election that ultimately boosted Cuomo's margins and dented Mamdani's margin of victory, but it wasn't enough for, it obviously wasn't enough to win. Mamdani did also win several majority or several precincts that do have a large number of Jewish voters in Park Slope and on the Upper West Side and in Morningside Heights. So it wasn't like Cuomo, Jewish voters, certainly not a monolith, right? But there was a ground, some degree of a surge against him in certain places.
And another issue that we haven't touched on, and what effect it might have had on the result, is Cuomo's sexual harassment scandal. Now, he was betting heavily on people either believing that all 11 women's claims were unfounded or voters just being ready to move on from whatever they thought he did. Can you tell how much that hurt his actual vote?
I mean, we kind of forget this because Cuomo, I think it's fair to say he ran a fairly lackluster campaign in both the primary and the general. But as little ago as 2018, Cuomo was getting in a general election over 80% of the vote in New York City, close to 85%. He would win Staten Island convincingly. So if you cut that support in half, it's still 40% plus. I think the sexual harassment stuff hurt him more in the primary just because he was covered as the heavy front runner, as the winner by the press. There was a lot more attention on that, whereas in the months after leading up to the general, it was Mamdani mania. And Cuomo, I wouldn't say he got a free pass, but his scandals and issues were not at the forefront of every conversation the way they were in the primary when it looked like he was potentially going to be the next mayor.
One more caller who wants to know about their neighborhood. Barbara in Bay Ridge. You're on WNYC with Michael Lange. Hi, Barbara.
Hi. Yeah, I was looking at the map of the election results in Bay Ridge, and there seemed to be sort of a jagged line, dividing line between the east and the west of Bay Ridge. The northern, east corner was very blue, which I think is where most of the Arab population lives. But I was surprised to see, almost like a line right down the middle.
Barbara, that's a great. Yes. Oh, I see that. So I think to start in the primary, I thought Bay Ridge would be closer to a swing state in the primary. Mamdani won it overwhelmingly. I see exactly what you're talking about with this map. Again, you live in Bay Ridge, so you would probably know better than I do. But from my time in Bay Ridge, I feel like this kind of tracks with a bit of a homeowner-renter divide, where it's along 4th and 5th Avenue, you have more apartment houses, more two-family homes, whereas Bay Ridge Boulevard, Shore Road, towards the water, more single-family homes. I would also probably guess that among that population, there's more of the old Bay Ridge, your Italian and Irish civil servants, older voters, more retirees, whereas 4th and 5th Avenue and also the northern, more Arab part is younger, a little more middle class, maybe also people are moving into Bay Ridge that are, looking to start families and things like that. So I imagine it's more of the new middle class of Bay Ridge on one side, and then the older. I would be very curious to hear your thoughts living in the neighborhood.
No, that definitely makes sense. I would think the houses going down towards Shore Road are bigger. It's a more wealthier, part of the neighborhood than between 4th and the highway there. So that makes sense that it would be more renters, on that side. Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised we got so many Mamdani voters, to be honest. I was very pleased to see it.
Barbara, thank you very much. Before we wrap up, I want to mention one prediction you got wrong, just because I know you're humble about this, and it's really interesting that the Bronx's only Republican in city council, Christy Marmorato, you predicted would easily win re-election from Throgs Neck and nearby neighborhoods that have a fair number of suburban-style single-family homes and a fairly large white ethnic population. Marmorato lost to Democrat Shirley Elderpaul. What happened there?
I think after I published it, I edited and said comfortably, because I was easily sounds too assured. Yes. So first of all, apologize to my friends in the labor movement who were you're wrong, Shirley's going to win. You were correct. And also to the good folks of the East Bronx who are Democrats. So Christy Marmorato won this seat 2 years ago in a very lower turnout, midterm council election, I guess you could say. And what's interesting about this seat is that half of it is, or not half, maybe 40% of it is largely white homeowner Italian Republican voters, and then a lot of it is very working class, very diverse. The high turnout environment of this election help bring out a lot of working class voters who certainly like stayed home 2 years ago, who voted for the Democratic candidate. I also think that originally I didn't foresee that Curtis Sliwa would collapse. And I think Sliwa really collapsing in this district hurt Marmorato down the ballot because I thought that Sliwa and Cuomo would both do quite well and Mamdani here would fare lesser so. And I thought Mamdani would potentially hurt the Democratic nominee, but the opposite happened. Mamdani ran very strong in the working class parts of the district. And then the parts of the district that Cuomo ended up winning, those voters split some of their ballots between Marmorato and Shirley Outlaballs, and to the point where while Marmorato did win places like City Island, Country Club, Edgewater Park, Silver Beach by like very large margins, she struggled to make any of the inroads that ironically like Donald Trump or other Republicans, even Lee Zeldin, had made with the district's non-white but like working and middle class population. And then she ended up losing her council seat because of it. So I think this race has very interesting ramifications in terms of the math to picking the next council speaker. But yeah, I will hold my hand up. Christy Marmorato lost. I was skewed, I think, partly by all of my conversations with Democrats on City Island who were voting for Marmorato. And as you can see from the map, Marmorato went over 60% on City Island, which is normally, it was like a Harris plus 10 area. It's normally like tiny Democratic tilt. But yeah, congratulations to Shirley and the Working Families Party and all the labor unions who supported her.
Michael Lange, who writes fascinating New York politics newsletter called The Narrative Wars. Is that the best place for people to follow your stuff?
And in Twitter, yeah.
And on Twitter, or X, as we say now. The Narrative Wars. Michael Lange, thank you very much for this hyper granular look at the election results. It was really, really, really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. Hope to be back soon.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. With us now for a few minutes is the new Governor-elect of New Jersey, Mikie Sherril. Governor-elect, welcome back to WNYC and congratulations.
Well, thank you, and thanks so much for having me.
Can you feel that title yet? Does it feel right yet, or does it feel weird?
It's a little clunky, Governor-elect, but it is great to hear, and it's a really exciting morning after a wonderful victory. We saw just great returns in all of our communities. I think really doubled down on traditional Democratic strongholds, working people, Black voters, Latino voters, because these are people that want good governance, great schools, good opportunities, good jobs. And I think that combined with my message of affordability and then my willingness to stand up to Trump and the Trump administration as they're attacking our economy really resonated.
Yeah, you won by 13 points, which well exceeded the polls. I want to ask you about Passaic County, maybe a national bellwether, largely Latino and other immigrant as a county north and west of New York City, for people who don't know the New Jersey counties, that used to go reliably for Democrats, went for Trump by 3 points last year, shocking some people, and now you won Passaic County by 15 points from what I read. Is this more than Passaic County, New Jersey, but Passaic County, USA in any way as you see it?
Yeah, I think we swung Passaic by about 18 points. And I'll tell you, I mean, I think what this is about is just really diving into those issues that New Jerseyans care about. And I've spoken to thousands and thousands of New Jerseyans, and it's cost, it's affordability, it's housing and healthcare and utility costs. And it was this combination, I think, of really wanting a leader who's going to take on the status quo and act right away and proactively. That's why I said I'm declaring a state of emergency and freezing rate hikes on utilities, because I want people to understand I'm not looking at a 10-year plan or a strongly worded letter. I'm really going to take this on immediately. And at the same time, I'm going to stand up to Washington because people see the tariffs, the One Big Beautiful Bill, the attack on the Gateway Tunnel project. That's going to raise their cost and already is raising their cost as well.
And we'll get to the utility state of emergency, but I guess I was curious if you see Passaic County as anything of a national bellwether, or maybe you were just too focused on your race in New Jersey to consider it one way or another that way.
Well, I was really focused on Passaic, and I think what we saw there was that a lot of the community really wanted to hear exactly how I was going to address their concerns. And so when you see the Latino community in Passaic County, the Muslim community in Passaic County came out big for me. I think they were people that wanted a seat at the table, like so many Americans wanted to make sure I was addressing those key needs. And like so many other people across the state, those key needs often turned out to be affordability. Latinos are our most entrepreneurial group in the state, starting new businesses, and the red tape and permitting issues have been front and center for them. The affordability message was meeting with people regularly, that I was going to events, that I was sitting with grassroots groups, that I was meeting and hosting roundtables, so that people felt very heard.
Your signature policy proposal, or at least a signature policy proposal, as you said, was declaring a state of emergency on utility prices. We think of Trump declaring a state of emergency on like every issue he wants to take more power on. Are there emergency powers that such a declaration might give you?
It certainly has resulted in the utility companies writing an open letter saying they're going to come to the table and want to negotiate this. I think they see the writing on the wall that we have got to lower costs for consumers. I think it's brought workers to the table to talk about how we need to put programs in place to drive more power into our grid to long-term drive down costs. And also we've laid out a program through some of the money that comes through our BPU, our Bureau of Public Utilities, to defray some of the cost of doing this. So I think as much as anything, this has really put everyone on notice that I am no longer going to allow the can to be kicked down the road. We have a sense, it gives everyone a sense of urgency on how this problem has got to be tackled, and it's got to be now.
So it's more a declaration of priorities that I think I hear you saying is bringing the utility companies and others to the table. It's not so much that with the state of emergency, you can now bypass the legislature or try to bypass the courts, anything like that.
That is certainly not where I am focused on. I'm really proud of all the legislative seats we've won with some really great legislators. I'm really excited about the future of New Jersey. So no, I'm not looking to undermine our legislature. I'm not looking to undermine our courts. I'm looking to fight for the people of New Jersey.
You ran a lot on Mr. Citarelli being too aligned with President Trump. That seemed to matter. Do you think the New Jersey result sends a message of any kind to the president himself? I
think what it sends a message is to all of those people who are in public office or want to be in public office to serve people. They better be focused on the people they want to serve. And my opponent wasn't. He was not focused on serving New Jerseyans. He was focused on making sure, he had an audience of one in his campaign, and it was Donald Trump. And I think people across the state saw that, knew that he would not be a leader in the state. He would not stand up to the president in any way, and he wouldn't fight for the people of New Jersey. As a former military member, as a mom of 4 kids, people in this state have seen my record of accomplishment. They know I'll take on, including members of my own party, when it comes to fighting for people in New Jersey, and I think that also resonated.
The president is quoted this morning, I don't know if you've seen this yet, saying the shutdown hurt the party around the country, his party. Do you think that was true in New Jersey? And if so, with what kinds of voters mostly?
Well, I certainly think it hurts the Republican Party because I think it shows their inability to govern and their incompetence and their lack of regard for serving people. I mean, not only did the president shut down the government, the Republican majorities in the House and the Senate haven't really done much. I mean, the House Speaker refuses to even call the House into session because he doesn't want to release the Epstein files. And so you're just seeing complete incompetence. And at the same time, the president has $6 billion he could be using for SNAP funds that he's refusing to use. So he's harming vulnerable people and not feeding children and families who are at risk for not being able to afford groceries. I mean, the whole thing, I think, just really paints the picture of how this administration is really failing the people of this country.
Do you think your victory helps or hurts to get the Gateway Tunnel project unterminated? Trump had said he was terminating it. Sherril said as a Trump supporter, he had a better chance of getting it unterminated.
I think it helps a lot because Jack Sherril was not really focused on getting that tunnel done. In fact, he was in the assembly when the ARC tunnel was canceled, and he wanted to cancel certain transit lines across the state. I, on the other hand, really am a big believer in public transit. I want to make sure people can get around our state more easily, get to jobs, create economic opportunity. So this certainly, I think, puts us on much stronger footing.
How else do you start to deal with President Trump? Is it different from Mayor-elect Mamdani, who challenged Trump to turn the volume up? I don't know if you heard that part of his victory speech. He actually challenged Trump to turn the volume up. Do you deal with the president differently?
I am focused on the people of New Jersey. And I will tell you right now, that means taking on the president in many ways, whether it is we've sued him to receive $200 million back on some Title I funding for our school systems. We also, I'm going to be working hard to unterminate the Gateway Tunnel project because he illegally has tried to freeze those funds, even though Congress appropriated them. I'll be working hard to address some of the hits from the federal government, clawing back as many federal resources as possible. But I'll also be focused on Trenton. We have to make sure Trenton's running incredibly well, whether it's cutting through red tape and permitting issues and delays, making sure small businesses thrive, and then really making sure our large businesses can grow here and provide great jobs.
You're not a democratic socialist like Zohran Mamdani, but what do you think your two victories combined, plus the moderate Democrat Abigail Spanberger, who won for governor in Virginia, maybe the Pennsylvania Supreme Court vote didn't get much publicity, but they're also very important, I think. What do you think all these things combined say about the Democratic Party overall today?
I think when the Democratic Party and when people who want to be public servants are focused on the people they serve and are focused on addressing those needs and driving down costs, making it easier for families to have opportunity to get good jobs, raise kids, and pay for their groceries, we're very successful. Those are the key issues that so many of us are focusing on. It's just how do we give people a shot in this country? And as we see the president trying to take away opportunity from really, thousands and thousands of people across the country by cutting access to school funding, innovation, jobs, the Gateway Tunnel project could be worth that could be about 100,000 jobs in the region, many of them good union jobs. We know unions provide great opportunity to families. When we're seeing the president trying to attack that, and as Democrats, we're all trying to make sure all families have access to opportunity, I think that's a really strong place for us to be.
Well, we will leave it there and let you make what I'm sure are many more stops today. Governor-elect Mikie Sherril of New Jersey, thank you so much for making this one of your stops. We look forward to talking to you many times once you drop the second half of Governor-elect from your title. Thank you for today.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it and have a great one.
The Trump administration has now frozen more than $2 billion in federal research funding.
I've lost $6 or $7 million.
As funding for research hangs by a thread, some academics are worried about what's already been lost.
Now we're behind.
Already?
Yeah. Like every serious person understands, and we are now behind China.
Don't miss our deep dive into the assault on universities on this week's On the Media from WNYC. Find On the Media wherever you get your podcasts.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, and this next segment is a guaranteed AI-free zone. Probably. When author and essayist A.J. Jacobs decided to live 48 hours without artificial intelligence no ChatGPT, no algorithms, not even the facial recognition feature on his phone. He thought it would be simple. Then he realized he couldn't check the weather, ride the subway, even brush his teeth without bumping into some kind of machine learning. Now, Jacobs, who some of you know from his past appearances on this show and other things, who's made a career out of turning himself into a human experiment, living biblically for a year, remember that book? Reading the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, even following the Constitution's original meaning, quote unquote, set out to see how much of his everyday life in this experiment was quietly run by AI. The answer, just about all of it. He wrote about it in the New York Times under the headline 48 Hours Without AI, a funny, revealing chronicle of how hard it is to escape the algorithmic web we all live in. So we'll talk about what he learned, what he wore, what he ate, and what his 2 days without AI say about the future of being human. Even with us now is A.J. Jacobs, host of the Hello Puzzlers podcast, essayist, author of The Year of Living Biblically, The Know-It-All, It's All Relative, in which he proved that he and I are very, very distant cousins, and his latest, The Year of Living Constitutionally, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Constitution's Original Meaning. Always great to have you, AJ. Hi, welcome back to WNYC.
Delighted to be here, Brian, and also very happy to hear it's AI-free. I was a little worried I might be talking to an AI-generated Brian Lehrer, but I'm now assured you're the real thing.
Well, I'm not an AI-generated Brian Lehrer, but I said it's probably an AI-free segment because of what you experienced. You don't even know what AI is actually influencing in your daily interaction. So when was the moment you realized that this would be harder than you expected?
Well, the origin story is that the article is sort of a sequel to an article I wrote for the New York Times 2 years ago, where I tried to avoid interacting with plastic. So no using plastic products or even touching plastic, which turned out to be incredibly hard because it's everywhere in our clothes, our carpets, our food, and we need to address that. But a couple of months ago, my editor at the Times, the great Jim Windolf, had the idea, what about a sequel instead of plastic, AI? Because his theory, which turned out to be true, is that AI is, as you say, everywhere. It's sort of hiding in plain sight, and it's affecting our everyday lives without us even knowing. And it's not just what you read on your Facebook feed or what you watch on Netflix, but what you eat. It affects what you eat, how you get around, and on and on. So that was the origin.
And before you even started, you had to figure out what actually counts as AI. So a lot of us will think, oh, ChatGPT or image generators, but you also included things like apps that predict traffic or filter spam. So how did you decide what made the cut and what didn't?
Yeah, most of the experts I talked to said AI is an umbrella term. So it covers ChatGPT, which gets all the attention. It's the new kid on the block. But it also covers something that's been around for a couple of decades called machine learning. And machine learning is how Netflix recommends movies to you. It's how Facebook adjusts your feed. And it's basically a program that evolves and learns. I think of it as a recipe where instead of the ingredients staying the same, if the recipe senses, oh, people like sugar, let's add some more sugar. And that turns out to be everywhere. It's in Con Edison uses machine learning to figure out how to allot the energy. The reservoirs, New York reservoir system uses machine learning to help predict where there's going to be demand. Now, they did want to make clear, engineers make the final decisions because they didn't want people to freak out. But they do use machine learning to help, as does so many other things in our lives.
But with that Con Ed example, did you have to live without electricity or cooking or things like that?
I did. I commit to the bit, as you know, Brian. So yes. I went full Amish, and I had a solar power generator, so I was able to use that for a while. But I ended up writing the article by candlelight on a on a typewriter because, of course, my laptop is filled with AI and machine learning. The battery optimizer alone is machine learning. So yeah, it was a time travel experience.
So listeners, we can take questions for A.J. Jacobs on trying to live for 48 hours without artificial intelligence, or you could scratch your heads and call in and say if you think you could do it. What part of your life depends most on AI, and would you even want to give it up? 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text. And we can talk a little bit about what you were wearing. Yours was an outfit from the 1970s, inherited from your grandfather. Describe it and why that?
Yes, I did end up looking absurd and do some absurd things, which is part of the process. But yeah, I looked like Austin Powers. I had on red and white checkered pants. I had on this flowered shirt. And that was because modern clothes are touched by AI. They may not be totally generated by AI, but they are certainly marketed using AI. A lot of designers are using AI for inspiration. And anything that is shipped on the supply chain is really affected by AI because machine learning figures out what is the most efficient way to ship things. So really, I said, I got to get away from modern clothes, and I went deep in my closet, and this was what I found.
What's the moral underpinning of this experiment? Like, I know we're all concerned about AI taking jobs and AI sucking so much electricity that is pushing a lot of people's energy rates up, other things as well. But it also helps us in many ways, some of these little ways that you're pointing out, from weather forecast to whatever. So what was the moral point you were trying to prove?
I love that question. And as you say, I was not saying AI is all bad or all good. I think it's both. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. As you say, I mean, it's great that AI is figuring out new medicines. I have no problem with it making our water system more efficient, so it's cheaper. But I think that we need to realize AI is already here. That was one of the big points, that to realize how omnipresent AI is, and that it's just going to get more intertwined with art. So we need to A, be aware, B, I want more transparency. When I get an email, I want to know, was this by ChatGPT? And I also want us to think more about regulations. There's California is considering a regulation where every image that's AI has to be watermarked. So you can see, oh, that's AI. I love that. And I'm also concerned about privacy. Like facial recognition, which uses AI, is so much more common than I thought. It was quite alarming. I ended up wearing these anti-facial recognition glasses.
I forgot to mention that about your outfit.
Yeah, it's quite a look.
Anti-facial recognition sunglasses. There's such a thing. I didn't know.
Yeah, there are privacy advocates out there who are very concerned and trying to fight back. So I did look like, people said I looked like Elton John. They were white and big, and they looked a little ridiculous. But yeah, as you say, it's not good or bad, but let's be aware of it and be intentional in how we use it and regulate it.
I think Bess in the Bronx has an AI pet peeve. Bess,
I love it.
WNYC with A.J. Jacobs. Hi, Bess.
How do you get away with getting a robotic person to make your appointment at the doctor's office? It drives me crazy. More and more of my doctors are doing this, the AI person. And what's really, really funny about it is that they have a background noise of other people talking. So it makes people feel that they're in an office, in quotes.
Tricky.
So it's very tricky. Yeah.
We know we're in a new age when people are nostalgic for call centers.
Good line, Brian. Well, it is amazing. There's also reports of people who have to do job interviews with robots. And so, yes, as part of this, first of all, I had to use a landline because that uses less AI than Verizon wireless. But I also tried to speak to actual humans, And it was a challenge when I tried to call eBay for customer service. They just flat out refused to connect me to a human. And I think, as you say, that is a big problem. It does make their lives more efficient, but a lot of times we're sort of in between the cracks. We have something that cannot fall into one of the buckets. And I feel that with AI, we're not getting that addressed.
A few more minutes with A.J. Jacobs on his 48 hours trying to live without artificial intelligence. And if you have anything else to say or ask him about it, 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. Listener texts. Jacob's experiment reminds me of Colin Bevins living for a year in New York City with the smallest environmental impact. The documentary No Impact Man was made about him, and he was on the show for that. I don't know if you're familiar with this. This goes back to around 2009. And I actually, to support him, we were broadcasting at that time from the 24th floor of the Manhattan Municipal Building. And just to show a little solidarity, I met him in the lobby of the building and walked up with him the 24 flights to the studio.
Wow.
Because he wouldn't take the elevator. And it was very instructive to me. I thought, okay, I'm leaving about 45 minutes for this. And it took like 8 minutes, So it just, it taught me something about how much we depend on technology that may impact the environment when we don't have to. But what do you think about that analogy?
I think it's a great analogy. I know Colin. I actually blurbed his book, so I'm a fan. And I think it's a great point. Because electricity is driven by AI, or AI helps it, that I couldn't use it. So again, I was doing the same thing. And also, speaking of elevators, a lot of office elevators now are AI driven in that they figure out what's the best floor to hang out on. Because if maybe it's the middle floor. And again, I have no problem with that. That might make my life a tiny bit better. It might save me 3 seconds in an elevator. But it also has AI has these unintended consequences that we have to be aware of. But yeah, I did not ride an elevator or, as I say, use my computer or iPhone. No, I couldn't listen to podcasts. Now, I don't know.
What?
Yeah, I don't know if
that's going too far. I'm kidding.
It is. I don't recommend that as a podcaster myself. But a lot of podcasts use AI in all sorts of ways. The research, the edit. No accusations, Brian, and no judgments, Brian, if you do. But in the editing, they take out the ums and the uhs from the guests. Of course, you're live, so I can and all I want.
And we have podcasts too, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I'll listen to the podcast and see if I'm cleaned up. But yeah, and in terms of mixing, so AI in entertainment is everywhere as well.
But I didn't know that AI could do that. Clean up the uhs and the ahs on purpose. I mean, on the rare occasion that we would do that because it was, overwhelmingly distracting or something like that in one, particular case. We certainly wouldn't do it throughout a conversation, but maybe there was just an embarrassing moment for a guest or something like that, and we take out one little spot. We have human engineers who do that. I didn't know AI could spot those.
Yes, but some people say that's not very good at it. So please keep your engineers on. I don't want to cause any trouble.
And I should note, because this may be the most extreme of all the things you had to do, by the end of day one, you're out in Central Park foraging for dinner. I'm guessing that's not your usual dinner plan. What did you actually end up eating? Well,
that was certainly, as you say, an extreme part. And I felt I could not eat grocery bought food because industrial farms use machine learning and AI in figuring out how to irrigate and how to ship. So I thought, well, to be really safe, I should forage in Central Park, where there's as little AI as possible. And you probably had this guy, Wildman Steve Brill, on the show.
Right,
yeah.
Right. He gives tours to show people what a lot of the plants and stuff are in the city.
Exactly. So I took some of his advice and I went foraging for what are they called? Plantain weeds. So I had some of those. I couldn't cook them, so I had them raw. Do not recommend them. But it did keep me somewhat fed.
And I'm cringing at the thought of interaction that those weeds may have had with some New York City critters, but I will leave that there. One more call.
You.
Tara in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hey, Tara, we have about 30 seconds for you.
Oh, no. Hi. Thanks for taking my call. One, I wanted to say it's really frustrating that AI is everywhere and we can't opt out because of its environmental impacts, and things like data centers simply aren't regulated enough. So we're kind of against our will forced to participate in the degradation of our climate. The other thing I just wanted to draw attention to, and I'm curious
that's the
what the
biggest
guests
thing
and
these days. By the way, and Tara, I'll let you finish. But we got a text that says Jacob says it's neither good nor bad AI, but there's a strong argument to be made that between the energy use, water consumption, and pollution, particularly of black neighborhoods, AI is inherently bad. So you're sort of seconding that, Tara, and go ahead and finish your thought.
And really what I called about was to see the guests and yours, Brian, thoughts on Local Law 35, which requires New York City agencies to report what algorithmic tools they use and how many. And if you look in the, I think, 5 years that law has existed, the vast majority of the agencies still report 0, which is obviously not true. I think DOT last year reported 1. An agency that controls, thousands and thousands of miles of streets, of intersections, use tons of softwares. And I'm curious how we might, what you all think about it, and how we might ask even our local government to enforce
Follow
that
their
more.
own law. Yeah. Tara,
thank you all.
Candidly, you're telling me something that I didn't know, and so that certainly fits in to the beat of the show, and we're going to check out Local Law 35 and maybe do a segment on it. AJ, like 15 seconds for a last answer. We'll see if that's, exactly how she described and all of that. But
those
a last
some big
thought.
issues for 15 seconds. But yes, I agree. More transparency. Government, I went online and found a lot of examples of algorithms and AI they were using, but more. We need to know where AI is so that we can figure out whether it's affecting us in a good or bad way so we can regulate it.
A.J. Jacobs' latest book is The Year of Living Constitutionally. His article in the New York Times that we've been discussing is called 48 Hours Without AI. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for listening to Brian Lehrer Weekend. We're back on the radio Monday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, follow us on Blue Sky at The Brian Lehrer Show, where there's always a conversation 24/7.